Hey guys, tonight we're not sipping smoothies or scrolling through food delivery apps in your air-conditioned kitchen. No, tonight, you're crouched in a dim, smoky Viking longhouse, kneeling by the hearth with frost still crusting your eyebrows and the cold biting at your toes through wool wrappings. You've slept on straw, the dog snored next to you, and now the day begins the only way it can, by chewing on a slab of barley bread that's more sour than soft, more survival than delight. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your local time and location in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're already awake because the light leaking through the smoke hole is enough to wake the crows. The longhouse stinks of ash, sweat, goats, and something vaguely onion-like, but you're used to that. You don't have much of a choice. Breakfast waits, not a buffet of eggs and bacon, but a thick, dense loaf of sour barley bread that's been wrapped in linen and stashed on a wooden shelf overnight. It's tough, it's chewy, and you're grateful for it. This bread, made from barley, oats, or rye, depending on the region and the harvest, is the Viking version of an all-purpose filler food. Barley was the staple crop in most Norse regions, not because it was delicious, but because it didn't mind the cold. When you chew this bread, your jaw works like a plow horse, and the tangy taste comes not from lemon zest or sourdough starter, but from the simple fact that yeast was often wild and unpredictable, and the flour was rarely sifted. You sit by the hearth while the rest of the household wakes, kids sniffling from the cold, the dog licking someone's face, and your cousin rolling over to complain about a mouse in her blanket. The smoke hole above does its best to vent the fire's smoke, but it mostly just clouds the beams and makes everything, including you, smell like a bonfire gone wrong. Still, that hearth is everything. It's your stove, your heater, your light source, and your comfort blanket. The pot still hangs over it, maybe with last night's stew slowly rewarming, because let's face it, Vikings reused food like modern people reuse passwords. Nothing went to waste. That's not romantic. That's just reality. Historians still argue whether the daily meals were eaten as distinct breakfast, lunch, dinner events, or just in a few communal sittings based on light and work. But for you, right now, it's survival mode. You rip off a hunk of bread, dunk it into lukewarm broth, and chew. You've done this 100 mornings. One thing people don't realize is that Viking food was not about pleasure. It was about storage, preservation, and calories. The bread is dry because that keeps it from molding. You soak it in broth to soften it because your teeth, especially if you're older, aren't a match for 3-day-old loaves. And if you're lucky, someone slathered a bit of goat's milk butter across the top before serving it to you. If not, well, at least the broth doesn't have weevils today. The hearth crackles. Someone tosses in a handful of dried birch bark to keep it going. You warm your hands and glance at the little woven bag of salt near the fire. Salt is precious. It came from the coast or was traded from abroad. You don't waste it, but you do, occasionally, press a grain to your tongue, just to remind yourself that flavor exists. And while the bread may be humble, the memories tied to it are not. This is the bread of funerals, weddings, and war councils. You've seen men pass it across the fire before sailing off to battle. You've helped your grandmother knead it before a solstice feast. And one time, someone accidentally baked in a coin. Now that was a toothache worth retelling. A fringe theory even suggests that some loaves were intentionally buried in grave mounds, not as food offerings, but as symbolic tools for the afterlife. Others say that's just archaeologists getting overly poetic with carbonized crumbs. Either way, you're not eating that kind, hopefully. So you chew your sour barley bread, sip your smoke-tinged broth, and watch the gray light creep across the longhouse wall. Another day begins, another chance to gather, trade, fish, cook, or just get through without slipping on frozen manure. And just as you're thinking that thought, someone shouts from outside, "The goat's out again." Of course it is. You groan quietly and pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders. The longhouse door creaks open and lets in a gust of icy air that smells like wet moss and goat regret. You step outside into the muddy yard, your boots sinking slightly into the half-frozen ground. Morning chores await. And first on the list, besides chasing down that stubborn goat, is breakfast. Real breakfast. Not just sour bread and broth, but something with a bit of protein, even if it crunches like driftwood. You head to the drying rack where rows of split fish hang like ghostly flags, fluttering in the chill. You grab one that looks less dusty than the others. It's a stockfish, likely cod or haddock, dried stiff by weeks of Arctic wind and sun. No salt, no spices, no garnish. Just fish, in its purest, most aggressively preserved form. You break off a piece with your fingers and pop it in your mouth. It snaps like a twig. Chewing is less about enjoyment and more about persistence. Stockfish, or hardfisker, was a Viking staple, not because it tasted good, it didn't, but because it could last for years without rotting. Some modern scholars claim that properly dried stockfish could remain edible for over a decade. You wonder whether that's comforting or horrifying. Fish for breakfast isn't special, it's default. You've eaten fish boiled, smoked, dried, salted, fermented, and, once memorably, left too close to the fire so it turned to ash on the outside and jelly in the middle. That was not a good day. Still, fish sustained your people through dark winters and lean summers. The coasts, rivers, and fjords offered an abundance of herring, trout, flounder, and eels, not to mention the occasional whale meat if someone got very lucky, or a little too ambitious. And let's not forget fermented fish, the kind that makes outsiders gag just from the smell. There are modern Scandinavian dishes that may trace their lineage to this, like surströmming, though historians still argue whether Vikings intentionally fermented fish in that extreme way, or whether the smell was simply a side effect of trying not to starve. You've definitely smelled something similar from the neighbor's cellar and learned the hard way not to snoop. While you chew your cod jerky, you scan the sky. Clear, for now. That means a better chance of catching fresh fish today if someone wants to brave the wind. But even if the men go out to sea, you know there are eel traps near the stream and a net or two soaking beneath the reeds. The coastal life isn't glamorous, but it's consistent. And protein is protein. What's surprising, especially to people who imagine Vikings as endless meat-devouring warriors, is how much of your diet depends on fish and dairy, not massive piles of red meat. Meat is a luxury. Fish is normal. And today, normal tastes like salt, wind, and slightly decayed optimism. As you chew, you break off another piece and give it to the dog, who accepts it solemnly, as if he, too, has resigned himself to a lifetime of breakfast barkfish. He sniffs it, then sneezes. Smart dog. Your younger brother emerges next, rubbing his eyes. He grabs a hunk of fish without even looking and sits beside you on a wooden log. Again? He mumbles. You nod. Always. He sighs. Somewhere in the distance, the goat bleats triumphantly from atop a woodpile. At least it's not raining. One thing people rarely talk about is the emotional monotony of food in Viking life. The highs, feasts, festivals, rare spices are few and far between. Most of the time, it's just doing the same thing every day. Dry fish, dry bread, a little stew, repeat, and yet your people survive, thrive, even strong bones, tough teeth, and the sheer ability to endure flavors that would send modern foodies running. A quirky theory, rarely mentioned in textbooks, suggests that the repetition actually created a psychological anchor for Viking endurance culture. In other words, if you can chew stockfish daily without complaint, you can probably row a ship across the North Sea in a storm. Still chewing, you glance over to the other side of the drying rack. Some smaller fish are there. Capelin, maybe, or smelt. Easier to cook, but harder to catch. Your uncle swears by them, calls them spear snacks, because they're quick to roast on a stick. You think he mostly likes how they sizzle. Historians still argue whether fish was considered clean or common in social rank. Some say wealthier households avoided fish, unless it was smoked salmon or imported delicacies. Others argue that fish was prized, especially in inland regions. Either way, this morning's cod doesn't care about your social status. It just wants to snap your molars. Your brother finishes his piece, spits out a scale, and stands. Goat's back in the barley, he mutters. You sigh. Another morning, another fish breakfast, another battle with the most chaotic member of the household, the goat, and you wouldn't trade it for anything, except maybe eggs. You finally wrestle the goat back into its pen with the help of your brother and a strategically placed bucket of hay. The goat stares at you with smug defiance, clearly plotting its next escape. You shut the latch, wedge a rock in front of the gate for good measure, and dust straw off your sleeves. The morning chores aren't done yet, not until someone stirs the pot hanging over the hearth, scrapes the soot off the rim, and decides whether today's stew will be edible or just... You step back inside the longhouse, where the hearth now crackles more confidently. The iron pot hangs from a simple wooden tripod above the fire. You grab the long stirring stick, charred at one end, worn smooth from use, and give the bubbling mixture a few half-hearted turns. It's mostly water, with a few stray barley grains, a suspiciously soft turnip, and some wilted greens you're choosing not to question. The cooking tools you have aren't exactly cutting edge. In fact, most of them are Stone Age holdovers. The pot is cast iron, heavy, solid, inherited from your grandmother's grandmother. There's no metal ladle, no delicate ceramic spoon. You use wood, bone, and sometimes just your hands. This isn't about kitchen aesthetics. This is about not poisoning yourself accidentally. That's why the cauldron stays in the same spot all winter, nestled into the hearth, blackened with years of smoke, steeped in memories and stews both legendary and regrettable. And, if you're lucky, someone will toss in a strip of dried meat later. If you're very lucky, it won't be the chewy tail end of an old ox hide that survived last season's feast. Your family doesn't have a baking oven. Most don't. Bread is cooked on hot stones, or in clay domes called bakestones, sometimes just directly over ashes, if desperation calls. You've seen flatbread bubble and blister on a rock that still smelled faintly of burnt rabbit. You've also seen someone burn their eyebrows trying to flip a loaf with a stick. It was, admittedly, the highlight of last autumn. Historians still argue whether Viking kitchens were centralized or decentralized, that is, whether communal cooking was common, or if each household jealously guarded its own pot. Archaeological evidence shows both. In your world, it's mostly household-based, but big feasts, that's when everyone brings their best pot, their finest stirrer, and their most exaggerated stories of past meals. As you stir the pot again, your cousin walks past, muttering something about not the cabbage stew again. You choose not to comment. Instead, you eye the cooking stones near the hearth. These were heated in the fire, then dropped into pots to bring water to a boil, especially before metal pots were common. Now, they're just relics, used more for nostalgia than necessity. One of your chores this afternoon will be scraping the soot off the underside of the pot. Again. It's a thankless job, but it keeps the smoke from getting worse and the food from tasting like chimney sweep. You once tried to skip that step, and the entire stew came out tasting like a burned mitten. Not recommended. There's also a small rack beside the fire, where clay bowls dry from last night's wash. Each one is slightly misshapen. Handmade, of course. One has a crack, but it still holds porridge, so no one dares throw it away. Pottery is valuable. You treat it like glass. And when one breaks, you don't weep, but you might sulk. Now, about knives. Every Viking household has a few, some plain, some carved. Yours are mostly bone-handled with worn iron blades. You've watched your aunt sharpen hers on a river stone so often that it's practically see-through. That same knife has gutted fish, chopped leeks, and once carved a rune into a wedding loaf. It's more than a tool. It's part of the kitchen's soul. And don't forget the spit, used for roasting meat over the fire when you have meat to roast, which is rare. The family's prized boar spit hangs on the wall like a trophy, only used during festivals, weddings, or unexpected visits from terrifying in-laws. What surprises outsiders most is that Viking cooking was surprisingly adaptable. You've boiled, roasted, fried, sort of, and even steamed things in tightly wrapped leaves. And while the range of ingredients is narrow, root vegetables, hearty greens, fish, and the occasional meat, your ancestors got creative. A pinch of wild garlic here, a splash of ale there, and suddenly, the same pot of barley and onion becomes almost tolerable. A quirky theory you heard once that some Viking wives added iron nails to their cooking pots to increase iron intake, unknowingly boosting their family's health. You're not sure if that's true, or just something the village blacksmith says to flirt. You pull out the stirring stick and give it a quick sniff. Better than yesterday. Maybe. Someone has tossed in a sprig of thyme, or something pretending to be thyme. You can never tell with dried herbs. They all smell like old sandals when burned. But still, there's something comforting about the ritual. The steady stir, the bubbling sounds, the heat on your face. You think of all the mornings and evenings spent doing this same dance, feeding people, feeding yourself, turning bare necessities into barely edible nourishment. You lean back on your heels, set the stick aside, and cover the pot with a cloth lid weighted by a small stone. It'll simmer until the noon bell, or until the goat finds a way in again. You glance toward the pen and narrow your eyes. just in case. The midday sun barely climbs above the horizon this time of year, casting long shadows across the yard as you step out to check on the brewing barrel. But before you reach it, your cousin hands you a wooden cup filled with something cloudy, warm, and slightly fizzy. You raise it to your lips, sniff cautiously, and sip. It's beer. Or at least, something pretending to be beer. You don't drink water. Nobody does. Not straight. Anyway, water is for washing, for soaking barley, and for dousing the occasional fire when a goat gets too curious. But for drinking, that's what ale is for. Or mead, if you're lucky. Or thin beer, if you're not. Even the children drink it, though theirs is so watered down, it tastes like oat water with commitment issues. This mug, it's somewhere between barely fermented barley water and a decent buzz. The Vikings brewed what they could from what they had: barley, honey, herbs, birch sap, even mushrooms if someone was feeling experimental or had a death wish. You swish the liquid in your mouth and feel the faint fizz on your tongue. It's warm from sitting too close to the fire, but it's still better than cold broth. You look into the barrel behind the longhouse. It's bubbling, gently, suspiciously, under a thick foam of grain husks. Brewing is equal parts art, guesswork, and magic. Your aunt oversees it like a priestess. She mutters to it. Sometimes she sings to it. Once she threatened to pour the whole thing out if it didn't stop attracting bees. Historians still argue whether Viking women dominated brewing culture or if it was a shared task. Most signs point to women, especially older women, taking charge of the ale. Some households even treated their brewer like a sacred role. You just call her Aunt Brynja and try not to annoy her when she's stirring the mash. Today's ale is made from sprouted barley, dried over the hearth, then mashed with hot water and flavored with wild herbs, nettle, yarrow, or bog myrtle, depending on what's not frozen. Hops weren't commonly used in Viking Scandinavia. That came later. Instead, your people brewed with grut, a mix of whatever herbs you could scrape together and not die from. The result? A drink that's never the same twice and always slightly confusing. You sip again and let your shoulders relax. This cup isn't just refreshment. It's survival. Ale and mead provided calories, hydration without the parasites, and even mild disinfection. You think back to the time someone tried drinking from the river, straight, and ended up vomiting into a cooking pot. No one ever did that again. What's strange, to a modern mind, is how alcohol was woven into daily life. There's no stigma, no concern about drinking too early. If the ale's ready, you drink it. Period. It's safer than the stream, tastier than boiled moss, and it helps you forget you've been wearing the same wool tunic for 8 weeks. There's even evidence of ritual drinking, cups passed around fires at funerals, at blots, sacrificial feasts, or during longship's launches when some cups were engraved with runes or names. Yours is plain, slightly chipped, and stained with at least 3 different types of drink. A fringe theory claims that Vikings sometimes spiked their drinks with hallucinogenic plants during ceremonies, henbane, belladonna, and others. You can't confirm that, but you do remember that one time your uncle drank from the wrong pot and spent the night talking to a spoon. To this day, he swears Odin spoke through it. You sit on the chopping block and cradle your drink while someone sets down a basket of sprouted rye. A few handfuls will be dried and mashed into tomorrow's brew. The rest might end up in porridge, flavored, of course, with a splash of ale. Because what else? As the cup empties, the warmth hits your chest, and the buzz finds your limbs. Not enough to dull your mind, just enough to soften the edges of a day filled with chasing goats, stirring porridge, and trying not to burn down the longhouse. You glance across the yard and see your grandfather sipping from his own mug, smiling faintly at the sky. It's the same smile he wears every afternoon. You think he's been buzzed since the Yule feast. There's a comfort to it, a rhythm. Drink, work, eat, repeat. You brew what you need. You share what you can. And when there's too much, you store it in sealed barrels, tucked deep into the cellar, cool and dark, waiting for winter gatherings or visits from distant cousins with suspicious timing. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand and set the cup down. Someone will refill it later, or you will. Either way, you nod to the barrel with the kind of respect you normally reserve for your elders or your favorite dog. It's not just a drink, it's tradition, it's calories, it's peace in a wooden mug, and tomorrow you'll drink it again. You take a deep breath before stepping back into the pen. The goat stares at you like it owns the place, and to be fair, it sort of does. This morning's milk won't fetch itself, and if you wait any longer, she'll kick over the bucket in protest. Again, you crouch beside her, warm your hands against your cloak, and position the bucket. The goat shifts, stomps once, then settles just enough to begin. Your fingers squeeze rhythmically, and the milk begins to squirt into the wooden pail with soft, uneven plinks. It's warm, frothy, and smells like everything in the pen: hay, wool, animal, and effort. Viking dairying isn't glamorous, but it's essential. In a land where winters stretch for half the year, and fresh vegetables are as rare as polite raiders, milk is a lifeline. You don't just drink it, you make cheese, butter, curds, and yogurt, sometimes all from the same batch. Cow's milk is prized, but not every household can keep a cow. Goats are more manageable, less picky, and somehow more dramatic. You tilt the bucket slightly to prevent spillage as the milk flows steadily now. This will be today's porridge base, maybe tomorrow's cheese. If there's enough cream, your aunt might churn it into butter, though churning takes forever and makes your arms feel like they've hauled a longship uphill. You remember your grandmother's butter churn, a tall wooden cylinder with a heavy lid and a long-handled plunger. You once tried to churn for 20 minutes, gave up, and had to be bribed back with dried berries. Still, that butter, fresh, slightly sour, and flecked with herbs, tasted like sunlight in winter. Milk doesn't last long, so you get creative. Some mornings you pour it over crumbled barley bread and call it breakfast. Other days, you boil it with onions and herbs for a thin stew. And when you're lucky, really lucky, someone makes skyr, a thick, tangy yogurt cheese hybrid that sticks to your spoon and makes you feel like royalty. Historians still debate whether Viking households produced skyr intentionally or stumbled into it via forgetfulness and time. Either way, it's here, and it's good. You've even seen people barter with it, offering wheels of hard cheese or bowls of skyr in exchange for cloth, salt, or, once a rather judgmental-looking chicken. You switch to the other teat, careful not to startle the goat. She snorts, unimpressed by your technique. The milk stream tapers off, and you know it's time to stop. You rise, stretch your back, and carry the pail gingerly back toward the house, careful not to trip over the ever-present chickens. Inside, the milk will be strained through cloth, usually linen or wool, into a clay bowl where it might rest for hours before use. If it curdles, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Viking dairy isn't about pasteurization or perfection, it's about function, fat, and fermentation. If it smells passable and doesn't bite back, you eat it. A lesser known tidbit, some sagas hint at ritual uses for dairy, like offering fresh milk to household spirits, or rubbing butter on doorposts during certain festivals. Whether that's superstition or spiritual habit, you're not entirely sure, but you've seen your uncle whisper to the butter churn during storm season. He swears it works. As you step inside, your aunt is already kneading dough with one hand and cradling a jug of last night's buttermilk in the other. She takes your pail without comment, pours some into a pan, and sets it near the hearth to warm. You watch the steam curl up and remember the days when that smell meant someone was sick, warm milk being a kind of comfort medicine for colds and fevers. Your younger sister toddles over asking for a sip. She's handed a small wooden cup and her face lights up as she drinks. You smile. It's moments like this that remind you milk is more than food. It's a tether to childhood, warmth, and care. There's a strange pride in knowing your people have survived countless winters, harsh travel, and endless battles, and did it all with goats. Forget axes and longships, the real power, dairy. Still, it's not always smooth sailing. There's the ever-present risk of soured batches, of curdling gone wrong, or that time when someone left a skin of milk near the fire too long and it exploded. You're still finding splatters on the ceiling. Modern scholars sometimes underestimate the role of dairy in Norse nutrition. They focus on meat and fish, forgetting that fat and calcium from milk products were critical, especially for children and elders. This is survival, one cup at a time. And so, you wipe your hands, eye the rising steam, and wonder if today's cheese will be soft and sweet, or firm enough to chip a tooth. Either way, you'll eat it. And probably chase the goat again afterward. You descend the cellar steps carefully, one hand gripping the rough wooden railing, the other clutching a torch that smokes slightly from damp. The air shifts from smoky warmth to something colder, denser, like breathing through wool soaked in turnip water. This is where your food survives the winter. This is the root cellar. Your feet hit packed dirt. The space is low-ceilinged, lined with shelves, crates, and woven baskets stacked like treasures. If your idea of treasure includes potatoes, onions, dried herbs, and shriveled apples. You pull your cloak tighter and walk between the rows, checking for mold, rot, or anything that might attract mice or worse. It's quiet down here, almost reverent. This place is more sacred than the hearth, more crucial than any weapon, because if the root cellar fails, you all starve. You kneel by the vegetable basket and pull out a misshapen rutabaga, still firm. That's a good sign. Viking families stored what they could: turnips, parsnips, carrots, cabbages, and leeks, tucked into straw, buried in sand, or stacked in cool corners layered with dried leaves. It's not glamorous, but it keeps the village upright. This winter stockpile is built in late autumn, during the final frantic weeks of harvest. You remember hauling sacks of cabbages uphill, hands red from the cold, while your uncle yelled about frostbite and destiny in the same sentence. Everything edible went into the ground or onto a hook. If it couldn't be stored, it got pickled, dried, or fed to the livestock. And if you were lucky, not the goat. You sniff a bunch of leeks. Still good. You'll need them for tonight's stew, or tomorrow's, or next week's, if you're careful. Historians still argue whether root cellars were common across all Viking settlements or mostly found in wealthier households. Some archaeological digs show elaborate stone-lined pits. Others reveal only shallow dirt depressions reinforced with wood. Yours is somewhere in between, a family-built cellar beneath the longhouse, cool, dry, and slightly terrifying if you stay too long. There's a small barrel in the corner filled with a sauerkraut, or something Viking adjacent, fermented cabbage, preserved with salt, and left to do its thing. You crack the lid, take a whiff, and immediately regret it. It's effective, sure, but even a mild gust will water your eyes faster than chopping onions. Still, this is what survival tastes like: sour, musty, crunchy, with a hint of despair. You seal the lid and move on. A quirky theory once floated around the village. Cabbages absorb evil spirits in dark places. That's why they hang braided garlic and dried greens in the corners of the cellar. Maybe it's superstition. Maybe it's an excuse to not clean spider webs. Either way, it adds to the ambiance. You take inventory mentally. 2 baskets of onions, 3 of dried apples, a sack of barley, 1 suspicious turnip that looks like it's plotting something. You'll have to trim the sprouting roots soon. Once, you left it too long and came down to find a tiny forest of angry carrot tops claiming squatters' rights in the grain barrel. In a smaller crate, wrapped in linen, are the rarest goods: foraged mushrooms, wild garlic bulbs, and dried berries, some so sour they could wake the dead. These are flavor bombs, saved for feast days or when the stew needs resuscitation. You sneak 1 berry now and suck on it as you walk. Tart, chewy, and slightly dusty. Perfect. The torch flickers as you pass the smoked meat rack. A few strips of cured pork belly hang high overhead, well out of reach of rats, or so you hope. The last time someone left the door ajar, you lost an entire ham to a particularly acrobatic weasel. You still tell that story when there's ale to spare. You run your hand along the shelf edge, dusted with flour and cold ash. This place, for all its silence, hums with memory. Every root, every bag of grain, every wilted herb represents hours of labor, planning, and compromise. The cellar is your ledger, your pantry, your insurance policy against the next frost, failed hunt, or flooded field. Modern readers may assume Viking diets were heavy on meat and mead, but here's the truth. You live on roots, on bulbs and boiled greens, on boiled anything, honestly, and you make it work with creativity, habit, and sheer Nordic stubbornness. You blow out the torch before leaving, it'll smoke too much otherwise, and feel your way back up into the light. Your eyes adjust slowly as the warmth of the fire meets your chilled cheeks. You drop the vegetables onto the prep table with a satisfying thud. The root cellar gave generously today. Now it's your job to make it edible. You've barely finished setting the vegetables on the chopping block when someone asks the most Viking question imaginable. "What's in the stew tonight?" You shrug and point toward the hearth, where the pot still simmers patiently like it's been waiting all day for someone to remember it. You grab a wooden spoon, stir the murky contents, and start the culinary detective work. Floating on the surface, barley grains, a wilted leek, something that might have once been fish. And, oh yes, today's hero, a turnip. This right here, is dinner. Stew is the unofficial national dish of Viking Age Scandinavia, if such a thing existed. It's not fancy. It's not varied. But it's the one dish that changes every day without ever really changing at all. You just keep adding to it. Scraps of meat, roots, herbs, leftover porridge, like some kind of eternal cauldron of survival. If you're lucky, it tastes better the next day. If you're really lucky, no one dropped a bone in it and forgot. Today's version has a little eel in it, caught near the river bend and cleaned with a level of enthusiasm that barely qualified as hygienic. You can tell it's eel because of the oily sheen and that one person who always complains that it's too chewy. Eel is common enough, trapped in woven baskets or caught with bare hands if someone's feeling bold. It's slippery, weird, and always looks like it knows your secrets. Still, it adds protein, which means your stew just went from sad soup to respectable dinner. You toss in the chopped leeks from the cellar and a handful of dried herbs, thyme, maybe. It could also be last year's leftover fennel. Historians still argue whether Vikings seasoned their food deliberately or just grabbed whatever didn't smell like feet. Either way, it adds a layer of complexity. You call it flavor. Your cousin calls it lawn clippings. You think back to that one time someone added acorns to the pot. Yes, acorns. They were leached first, of course, soaked in water to remove tannins. That process took days, and you're still not sure it was worth it. The stew turned out thick, slightly nutty, and vaguely bitter, like a recipe written by a squirrel. Still, Vikings were nothing if not resourceful. You've heard of people adding moss, seaweed, or even fish heads to stretch out the meal. Nothing goes to waste, not when winter still breathes down your neck in early spring. You call your younger siblings to help prep. One peels onions with more tears than skill. Another tries to mash yesterday's barley into something porridge adjacent. You let them help, not because they're useful, they're not, but because Viking kitchens are communal. Everyone eats. Everyone stirs. Everyone complains. And you oversee the pot like a commander reviewing a battlefield. The stew bubbles, sending up a savory plume of steam that makes the longhouse smell less like goat and more like comfort. It's not fancy. It's not feast-worthy, but it's warm, filling, and slightly better than raw turnips. There's a wooden ladle carved with runes for luck. You dip it in, pull out a scoop, blow gently, and taste. It's edible, not exciting, but solid, like the Viking equivalent of meh. You add a pinch more salt from the pouch by the hearth, carefully, reverently. Salt is precious, traded from the coast or boiled down from seawater. It's what makes the stew taste almost like something you'd serve to a guest, instead of something you'd use to chase rats away. A quirky fringe belief says stew tastes best if stirred clockwise before sunset, or else you'll insult the house spirits. You follow it out of habit, even if you roll your eyes. Once, your brother dared to stir it the wrong way, and stubbed his toe so hard he limped for a week. Coincidence? Maybe. Maybe not. As the pot simmers and the shadows grow longer, you notice the hush settling across the house. Everyone's watching the fire, listening to the quiet gurgle of dinner coming together. It's a lull, a shared breath before the next burst of chores or stories or bickering. You ladle the stew into wooden bowls, no fancy plates, no garnish, just sustenance. The steam curls upward like a silent prayer, a scoop for the eldest, a scoop for the youngest, and the last for the one who caught the eel. Fair is fair, Modern people talk about meal prep like it's a lifestyle trend. You smile at the thought. Viking meal prep is throwing everything edible into one pot, simmering it all day, and hoping no one sneaks the last slice of meat. And yet, there's something beautiful in that simplicity. In feeding your family with what the land and sea give you, in honoring old methods, old flavors, old instincts that never really left. You settle near the hearth with your bowl, legs tucked under you, steam rising in soft spirals. You take the first bite. The eel is tender. The barley is soft. The turnip tastes like it lived a hard life but tried its best, and that's enough. You don't even get halfway through your bowl of stew before someone bursts through the longhouse door, holding a feather in one hand and a very dead bird in the other. You sigh. You already know what's coming. We caught something, your cousin declares, as if bringing home a limp grouse is equivalent to slaying a dragon. The bird dangles from their fingers, wings askew, eyes already half-lidded in defeat. You set your bowl aside and take the offering with a practiced eye. It's small, scrawny, and probably more bone than meat. But you're not in a position to be picky. The Viking diet doesn't thrive on variety. It survives on opportunity. And today's opportunity comes with feathers and attitude. Birds are tricky. If you're near the coast, you might snare seabirds, gulls, auks, even puffins, though puffin is more celebrated in theory than in chewing. Inland, it's grouse, quail, ducks, or, if you're daring and a little desperate, a suspiciously large crow. You pluck the bird by the hearth, dropping feathers into the fire so they disappear in soft, sulphurous bursts. It's a familiar rhythm. Slice, gut, rinse, roast. The Vikings didn't have rotisserie chickens, but you've seen your uncle spear a duck and turn it slowly, over fire, like it's a ceremonial sacrifice, to the gods of protein. Historians still argue whether wildfowl was a regular part of the Norse diet or a seasonal bonus. You can't imagine anyone here passing up extra meat, especially when the alternative is turnip soup 5 nights in a row. You once ate boiled crow during a snowstorm and pretended it tasted like beef just to make it through dinner. As you prep the bird, you remember last autumn's goose chase, literally. The village kids tried to herd a gaggle of wild geese into a pen using sticks, blankets, and a truly questionable plan. The geese won. But that night, someone did manage to catch one straggler, and the feast was noisy, greasy, and worth every honk-related injury. You coat the bird in a rub of salt and wild garlic, then suspend it over the fire using the spit. It'll take an hour, maybe more, to cook through. In the meantime, you make room for it beside the stew, careful not to tip the pot and start a chain reaction of Viking chaos. By now, the longhouse smells amazing. Wood smoke, herbs, rich fat dripping into flame. You watch the bird roast slowly, skin crisping, fat popping, the crackle of the fire answering every sizzle. This is one of those rare nights where something smells truly indulgent, even if it's the size of your hand. Someone behind you jokes that the bird better not be swamp chicken again, the unofficial village name for anything caught near the bog that ends up tasting like socks. You laugh, lightly, because you're pretty sure this is swamp chicken, and the joke is on all of you. Modern eaters would be baffled by how much effort goes into such a small bird. But for you, it's not about portion size. It's about ritual, reward, and protein. Even a few bites of roasted flesh lifts the mood of the whole household. You've seen tempers vanish after a bite of greasy duck wing. You've seen proposals made over shared drumsticks. You've seen a toddler bite into a boiled egg and declare it better than snow, which, to be fair, isn't a high bar. And birds aren't the only prey. Occasionally, you trap hares or squirrels, though squirrel stew is mostly bones and regret. If someone's particularly brave and very bored, they might try to catch ptarmigan, which changes color with the seasons and makes you question everything you know about camouflage. A quirky bit of folklore claims that eating owl meat makes you dream in riddles. You're not sure if that's true, but you've definitely seen someone hallucinate after gnawing on a suspicious wing and then try to converse with the firewood. As the bird nears readiness, you baste it with drippings collected in a carved wooden bowl. The fire pops in appreciation. The longhouse begins to stir, people sniffing the air like hounds, hoping dinner comes with seconds. You finally lift the bird from the spit and slice it into slivers, equal parts ceremony and math problem. Everyone gets a piece, even the youngest, who sucks happily on a greasy bone and declares it the best dinner ever. Even though she says that every time meat is involved, you eat yours slowly, the skin is crisp, the meat dry but flavorful. You chew carefully around the tiny bones, grateful for the moment. It's not a feast, but it's a reminder that even in the coldest months, the world sometimes hands you a bird, and you make it count. You rise early the next morning, drawn not by hunger or habit, but by the unmistakable smell of smoke and salt wafting from the shore. The others are still asleep, snoring into wool blankets or muttering through dreams of roast duck, but you're already wrapping your cloak tight and heading toward the smokehouse. Today, you help preserve the catch. Preservation is everything. Without it, the Viking diet would be nothing but soggy roots and dashed hopes from November to May. So you salt, dry, ferment, bury, or smoke every scrap of meat and fish you don't eat immediately, a process that is equal parts chemistry, prayer, and stubbornness. The smokehouse is a low, dark structure, no windows, just cracks in the wood to let the breath of the fire escape. You duck through the doorway, eyes adjusting to the swirling haze. Inside, rows of fish and meat strips hang from wooden poles, dripping slowly into the fire pit below. Today's task is layering cod in barrels of salt. You scoop handfuls of coarse sea salt, precious stuff, traded or harvested with effort, and coat the fish until it disappears under the white crystals. It's not glamorous work, it's repetitive, sticky, and your hands will smell like brine for a week. But without it, you'd starve before spring. You glance up at the strips of mutton dangling from the rafters, dark, shriveled, fragrant with alder smoke. Those pieces have been hanging for weeks. They'll stay until they're dry enough to last through the next season, or until someone gets too impatient and gnaws on one like jerky. You've done it. You're not proud. Historians still debate whether Vikings smoked food as a primary method or mostly salted and dried. Truth is, it varied. Coastal families smoked more, thanks to abundant driftwood and damp air, while inland folk leaned on salting, fermenting, or burying food in cold pits. Your family does a little of everything. A kind of culinary insurance policy. You shift a rack of eels, their silvery skins turned leathery with time. They twist gently as you move them, as if still remembering the river. Eel keeps well when smoked, though some say it smells like regret. You've eaten worse. A fringe theory from a visiting merchant once claimed hanging fish near elder trees increased their flavor. No one believed him, but he was polite, So now there's an elder twig nailed to the smokehouse wall. You leave it be. You step out for air and walk to the edge of the bay. A few villagers are salting hides, repairing nets, or inspecting crab traps. Everything smells like salt and iron and wind. The sun peeks through the low clouds, casting a silver wash across the water. It's cold, sharp, and beautiful in a way that makes your teeth ache. Back in the smokehouse, your cousin is stirring a barrel of fermented trout, a pungent experiment involving fish, salt, and thyme. It bubbles ominously. You take one whiff and immediately decide it's not your turn to stir. He glares at you anyway. Fermentation is a gamble. Sometimes it results in flavor, sometimes in food poisoning. Still, when done right, it creates delicacies that pack calories and nutrients into shelf-stable formats, essential for voyages or late winter weeks when even the turnips give up. You roll barrels into the shade where they'll sit until needed. Some will be opened during Yule, others hauled onto ships for long journeys. You remember helping pack dried meat for a raiding party once, the salted pork wrapped in birch bark, the smoked fish sealed in beeswax-lined bags. The captain joked it was provisions or punishment. You laughed. Mostly because it was true. Modern folks think preserving food means refrigeration, expiry dates, plastic wrap. But for you, it means a cellar that doesn't flood, smoke that doesn't blow the wrong way, and just enough salt to keep the maggots at bay. Speaking of which, you check the back wall. No bugs. That's good. One time, someone stored meat too close to a damp corner and ended up with a jerky that moved on its own. You still won't eat from that side of the smokehouse. By midday, your arms are sore, your nose is numb, and your clothes smell like smoked goat and burnt thyme. You wipe your hands on a scrap of wool and sit by the doorway, watching the curls of smoke rise like silent prayers. There's something peaceful in it, a quiet confidence that what you're doing matters, that this effort, this salt and fire and time is what will carry your family through the lean weeks. You tear off a piece of yesterday's dried trout and chew slowly. It's chewy, salty, and faintly bitter. Not great, not bad, but it won't kill you. And that's the point. Tomorrow, someone will ask, "What's for dinner?" And because of today, you'll have an answer. The first thing you hear is laughter, echoing from the longhouse like wind off the fjord. The second thing is the sound of teeth tearing into meat, and the third is your own stomach answering like a war horn. Tonight is no ordinary dinner. Tonight is a feast. The reason? It doesn't really matter. Maybe someone returned from a long voyage. Maybe a neighboring clan sent a gift. Maybe the gods are being unusually quiet. And that feels like a reason to celebrate. What matters is that the long table is set. The fire is high. And the smell of roast meat fills every timber of the hall. You grab a wooden bowl, a crude knife, and a hungry grin. You're not alone. The whole village seems to be here. Warriors, weavers, elders, and children, all packed shoulder to shoulder, knees touching, cloaks steaming with melted snow. The benches creak, the dogs beg, and somewhere in the corner, someone is already 3 cups into the mead. The feast begins, as always, with bread and broth. But no one's pretending that's the highlight. The real excitement is the roast boar, turning slowly on a spit so long it takes 2 men to rotate it. Its skin crackles, the fat hisses, and when the first slices are carved, everyone leans forward just a little too much. You get a thick slab, charred at the edges, dripping with juices. You tear into it with your teeth, and for a moment, the cold, the chores, the endless goat-related disasters, all of it disappears. There's only meat, warmth, and the growing ache in your jaw from chewing too fast. Historians still argue whether meat was truly common or mostly reserved for feasts and sacrifices. Based on your day-to-day diet of barley and roots, you'd vote for the latter. Meat is celebration food. Boar, beef, lamb, those aren't regular meals. They're reserved for weddings, raids, solstices, or surviving something grim and cold with all your toes intact. Tonight's feast includes more than just meat. There are bowls of cooked peas, mashed with lard and herbs, platters of roasted onions and apples, a combination that tastes surprisingly sweet and savory, even a pie of sorts, flatbread folded over minced lamb, heavily spiced with wild thyme and something that might be juniper. The ale flows freely, poured from jugs passed down the table. You lift your cup, clink it against your neighbor's, and sip deeply. Warmth spreads from your throat to your belly, washing over the ache of the week. This is not hydration. This is joy. You notice the elders get the choicest cuts, the thick fat, the tender ribs, the marrow-rich bones. Children get smaller bites, but no one goes hungry. Even the dogs are tossed bones under the table, tails thumping like war drums. There's a rhythm to the feast. Eat, laugh, drink, toast, repeat. Someone bangs a knife on the table and begins a boast. Half-true tales of battles, sea monsters, and an especially brave moment involving a goose and a borrowed tunic. You listen with a smirk, chewing on a bit of fatty lamb that tastes like fire and stories. You'll probably tell your own tale before the night ends, preferably one that involves less goat and more glory. A fringe theory claims that Vikings used feasts to negotiate politics and marriages. Honestly, you believe it. Right now, 2 clan leaders are murmuring over cups, and someone's daughter keeps making eyes at the boy who caught last week's goose. Love, like stew, starts in strange places. More food arrives. Smoked trout, flaky and rich, served cold beside hard cheese. A bowl of curds with honey is passed your way, sweet, thick, and rare enough that you close your eyes for the first bite. You're not religious, but that mouthful might convert you. And then, suddenly, the music begins. A man near the fire plucks a lyre, strings humming like wind across string. A woman beside him taps a rhythm on a carved drum made from goat hide. Others begin to hum, then sing, their voices rising like steam into the rafters. You lean back, belly full, hands greasy, and feel the world slow down. This is the part of Viking life people rarely picture. Not the raids, not the blood, but the bonding. The moments when survival isn't just grit, it's celebration. When the long winter isn't endured in silence, but defied with roast pork and too much mead. A small girl dances in the smoke. Someone spills ale and curses in a way that makes everyone laugh. The fire cracks. The music builds. And someone proposes a toast to Thor, goats, and whoever brought the extra turnips. You drink to all 3, and somewhere in your chest, beneath the layers of wool, smoke, and digestion, you feel something like gratitude for the feast, for the fire, for the fleeting moment where everything feels enough. The fire's still smoldering the next morning when you wake up with a dry mouth, a wool blanket tangled around your legs, and a faint memory of someone singing an epic ballad about onions. The feast is over, but the real question now is, what happened to the horse meat? You shuffle toward the hearth, rubbing smoke from your eyes, and find your cousin crouched by a clay bowl, tearing bits of leftover meat with greasy fingers. Is that, you begin, and she nods solemnly. Yep, the sacrifice. Ah, it's not every day that a horse is on the menu. In fact, most days, it absolutely isn't. But when the time comes, whether to honor the gods, celebrate a turning point, or beg for slightly less rain, a horse might be offered, not just offered symbolically, but cooked, shared, and eaten with reverence and a little hesitation. The blot, or sacrificial feast, is a serious affair. Animals are chosen carefully. Rituals are performed. Blood might be sprinkled, prayers spoken, and the best parts of the animal roasted over sacred flame. You once helped prepare for a blot dedicated to Frey, god of fertility and prosperity. That time it was a bull. This time, apparently, it was a horse. Modern folks might recoil at the idea, but to your people, meat is sacred, and sacrificing a horse isn't done lightly. It's both offering and privilege, a signal that something important, cosmic, even, is being acknowledged. You tear off a piece and chew. It's lean, slightly gamey, with the texture of overworked muscle and reverence. Not your favorite, but you don't complain. It feels meaningful and very, very chewy. Historians still argue whether eating horse was common, ritual only, or taboo in some regions. Evidence varies. Some settlements show butchered horse bones, others don't. Some sagas praise the meat, others are quiet. But what's clear is that when it happens, it's never casual. It's ceremonial. The rest of the blot leftovers include blood sausage, made from the horse's blood and barley, carefully boiled and seasoned with wild onion. That's tastier, rich, filling, spiced in a way that makes you wish every week were sacred. It's served in thick slices, glistening in the morning light, alongside fried cheese and a spoonful of skyr. There's also a cauldron of awful stew, less exciting, more obligation. You sip the broth, thickened with lard and herbs, and do your best to appreciate the texture. Viking hospitality means honoring every part of the animal. Nothing is wasted, even if it jiggles when it shouldn't. A quirky tale says that Odin once disguised himself as a butcher and offered cursed horse meat to test a king's humility. You're not sure if that's true, but you eye the stew a little more cautiously. Outside, the smoke from last night's feast still lingers, clinging to the beams in the side of your cloak. The village is quiet now, some folks sleeping off the mead, others already tending to animals or mending nets. The festive mood has faded into that familiar, comforting fog of, we'll talk about this later. You help clean up. Bones are gathered for tools or carving. Skins are set aside for tanning. Even the hooves might become glue, or a peculiar soup if someone's feeling bold. The idea that food ends with the feast? Laughable. You'll be eating stew from this horse for a week. You catch your aunt muttering over a small bundle of sacrificial ash, which she buries near the front steps with a reverent pat. Some say it wards off illness. Some say it just keeps the chickens curious. The line between food and ritual is blurry in Viking life. One meal might nourish your body, your ancestors, and you're standing with the gods, all in a single bite. You don't always understand it, but you follow the rhythm. Eat what's offered. Toast when invited. Don't mock the horse sausage. As you carry a bucket of bones to the compost heap, you glance at the sky, overcast, cold wind, crows watching from the roof beam like they own the place. You shake your head. Back inside, someone stokes the fire and rewarms the broth. You dip your cup, take a sip, and settle by the flame. It's not the most tender meat. It's not your favorite feast. But in the end, it's food. And in Viking life, that's always a small miracle. You wake up to the pungent scent of something both familiar and alarming: onion, garlic, maybe horseradish, all stewing in a single bowl that's somehow also giving off hints of dirt and damp wool. It's time to talk about flavor, or rather, the Viking version of it. Because let's be honest, the Viking diet is not known for subtle seasoning. It's survival food first, seasoning second. But that doesn't mean your ancestors were flavorless brutes chewing through raw barley and weeping from blandness. No, they got creative. They just didn't have cinnamon and saffron on speed dial. You crouch beside the hearth where your aunt is stirring a bowl of mashed dried peas with what she proudly calls her secret spice mix. You squint into the pot and recognize most of it: wild onions, mustard seeds, some ground juniper, and what you hope is pepper, but might also be ash from last night's fire. Seasonings in the Viking world are foraged, traded, or just straight up guessed. Your pantry has no fancy labeled jars. Instead, it's bundles of dried herbs hanging from beams, bits of crushed bark in leather pouches, and the occasional imported treasure, like dried dill from the south, or anise, or a mysterious clove-scented root someone swore wasn't poisonous. The core flavors of your world come from onions, leeks, garlic, parsley, thyme, and wild horseradish. If you're near the coast, you might have seaweed. Inland, you've probably tried to brew soup from pine needles once. Spoiler: don't. You help your aunt grind some dried roots with a mortar and pestle made from bone and basalt. It takes forever, but the results, however crude, make your stew taste like something more than hot sadness. You toss in a pinch of dried sweet gale, an herb that kind of smells like mint and kind of smells like socks, and stir slowly. Historians still argue whether Vikings used imported spices regularly or if those were rare luxuries reserved for the elite. Some graves include spice remnants, hinting at trade with far-off lands. Others suggest these finds were symbolic, not culinary. Either way, in your house. Flavored means you had time to go into the woods and weren't chased by wolves. You remember the one time a trader came through with coriander and charged a chunk of amber for a single bag. Your uncle bought it, tasted it, and declared it not worth the chew. He still used it in porridge the next morning, though. Then there are the oddballs: fermented whey, known as misa, used to add tang. Some people add vinegar-like brews made from sour beer or steeped herbs. One eccentric neighbor soaks garlic in honey and calls it warrior paste. You tried it once and nearly lost a tooth. And let's not forget about ash. Yes, actual ash. Some cooks sprinkle small amounts of fine ash from clean-burning wood into stews for minerality and flavor. Others say that's just lazy cleanup. You're not sure where you fall, but the last time you stirred the pot with a burnt stick, it did taste richer. A quirky theory from a wandering skald once claimed that flavor was considered distracting to proper Viking discipline, and that real warriors preferred their food stoic. You think that's nonsense. The skald also drank boiling ale by mistake and sang through a swollen tongue for a week. As you finish prepping the day's stew, you add a few dried apple slices, saved from autumn. It's not traditional, but it's comforting. The sweetness cuts through the fatty broth, makes people pause before grimacing. The children might even smile. By afternoon, the longhouse smells rich and layered: herbs, dried meat, root vegetables, and something vaguely sour you choose not to investigate. Everyone's looking forward to dinner, not because it's fancy, but because it tastes just a bit different today. You sit by the fire, sipping broth from a wooden cup. It's warm, peppery, and somehow more satisfying than it should be. This, you realize, is Viking flavor. It's not about excess. It's not about variety. It's about making what little you have feel like something more. And tonight, thanks to a few dried herbs, some crushed garlic, and a prayer whispered over the pot, you did exactly that. You're helping haul nets in from the shoreline when you spot it, a flash of silver under the water, a quick flick of scales, and then the heavy slap of fish against wood. It's a good catch today. No storms, no broken traps, and, best of all, no eels tangled in your boots. The sea, for all its cold cruelty, is generous when it wants to be. You empty the net onto the sorting board. Cod, herring, flatfish, and a few bold crabs stare up at you like they've made terrible life choices. You sort them quickly, saving the best for fresh cooking, the rest for drying, pickling, or gifting to the neighbor whose goat helped pull your sled last week. In the Viking world, the sea feeds your family as much as the land does, sometimes more. You rinse a herring in a tide pool, scale it with your knife, and slice it cleanly down the belly. It's fresh, oily, and filled with tiny bones that will haunt you later. But for now, it's the promise of protein, of survival, of flavor that isn't just root-based or stew-adjacent. Historians agree that fish played a central role in Norse diets, especially along the coasts and fjords. Inland folks relied more on preserved meats and dairy, but anyone within arm's reach of a boat lived on the sea's terms. It gave you cod, haddock, shellfish, salmon, even the occasional whale if you were incredibly lucky, or unlucky, depending on the splash zone. Today's haul includes a small monkfish, all teeth and flaps, ugly as a troll's foot, but delicious once you've trimmed off the terrifying parts. You toss it into a basket and keep going. Shellfish is more controversial. Some people love it. Mussels, cockles, limpets grilled over fire or boiled into thick chowders. Others eye it suspiciously, convinced that anything that lives in mud shouldn't be eaten. You're in the pro-shellfish camp, especially after that one stormy night when nothing else was left but sea snails and prayers. You once ate sea urchin on a dare. It was an experience, spiky on the outside, gooey on the inside, and deeply confusing all around. Then there's the risk, the occasional poisonous catch, blowfish, spoiled crustaceans, the ever-dreaded rotten clam. One uncle swears he hallucinated for an entire day after eating a bad scallop. Another claims it was just too much mead. Either way, no one has touched that rocky inlet since. A fringe theory holds that some Viking settlements used poisonous fish intentionally, drying them, fermenting them, and consuming them in carefully measured portions to produce spiritual visions. You're not sure if that's mystical or just culinary self-sabotage. As the sun climbs, you gut and clean the catch, working efficiently. You pack salted herring into clay jars, seal them with beeswax, and place them in the cool corner of the longhouse. Fresh fish gets smoked or grilled. Smaller catches get tossed into the stew pot. Fish of mystery, as your cousin calls them. No one ever really knows what's in that ladleful, but it's always gone by nightfall. You prep a flatfish for lunch, laying it on a hot stone by the fire, and pressing it gently with the spatula carved from driftwood, the skin crisps, the flesh sizzles, and you sprinkle it with a touch of sea salt and wild thyme. For a moment, it smells almost like modern food. Almost. You sit down cross-legged with your plate and dig in. It flakes perfectly, soft and oily, with a crisp edge that makes you feel like a sea king, even if you're still covered in kelp and your hands smell like crab. Modern diets often romanticize Viking eating, wild, fresh, primal, but you know the truth. It's gritty, seasonal, tide-dependent, and often a game of what won't poison me today, yet there's no denying the sea gives you life, and sometimes it gives you lunch that doesn't need stew to disguise it. You offer a piece to your little brother, who refuses because it still has an eye. You eat his portion. As the tide recedes, you check the traps once more, reset the nets, and give thanks, not aloud, just silently, the way your mother taught you, to the sea, the sky, and the fish that didn't get away. You won't eat them all today. You won't even like all of them, but they'll carry you through winter. And tomorrow, the sea might give again. The fire is low, the stew is gone, and you sit with the bone in your hand, idly gnawing the last bit of meat from it, while your brother pokes the ashes with the stick. "How much meat do you think we actually eat?" he asks, not looking up. You pause, mid-chew. It's a good question. The stories say you feast like kings, piles of roast boar, platters of smoked lamb, haunches of venison held aloft by heroes. But real life? It's a bit more chewy. The truth is, meat is precious, meat is rare, and most of the time, you eat less of it than people think. You toss the bone into the fire and lean back, watching the sparks rise. On an average day, your meals are built around grains, dairy, roots, and fish. Meat, real meat, from land animals is more of a bonus. It shows up when a hunt is successful, when an animal is too old to breed or work, or when a celebration demands it. That doesn't mean you never eat it. You do what? Duh. But not every day and rarely in large portions. More often than not, it's used to flavor the pot. A few bones, a strip of fat, a chunk of offal stirred into barley and cabbage to elevate the whole thing from survival to actually edible. Historians still debate whether Vikings consumed as much red meat as their reputation implies. Some archaeological sites show plenty of animal bones, cattle, pigs, goats, deer. Others suggest that most of the animal was used for tools, clothing, and trade rather than dinner. You think back to the last time someone brought home a deer, the excitement, the gutting, the long hours of butchering and preserving. Every part was used. Tender cuts salted and dried, organs cooked quickly, bones boiled into broth, sinew turned into thread. Nothing wasted. Even the hide now serves as a rug near the sleeping area. A quirky theory from a wandering priest once claimed that Vikings believed eating too much meat made you aggressive, a danger to both your heart and your marriage. That same priest later choked on a beef rib at a Yule feast and swore off red meat forever. You still make jokes about it. Today, the only land meat you've seen is a slice of salted pork, fried crisp and laid across porridge like a crown jewel. You share it between 3 people at Sa. It's salty, smoky, and gone in 2 bites. More often, your meat comes in smaller, stranger forms, bits of boiled marrow smeared on flatbread, crispy lamb fat rendered into cooking oil. of smoked mutton chewed like jerky on long trips. Stew meat so overcooked it collapses if you look at it wrong. You remember helping dig a pit roast once, where a sheep was wrapped in leaves and buried with hot stones for hours. The meat came out tender, rich, and smoky, and covered in ash. Still, it was one of the best meals of your life. You dream about it sometimes. In leaner years, people have made mock meat, porridge shaped like sausages, fried in leftover fat. It's not the same, but if you close your eyes and squint, you can pretend. Your cousin once tried to roast a turnip and call it a steak. No one laughed. Too hard. And then there's offal, a Viking delicacy if you ask the elders. Liver, heart, kidneys, all boiled with herbs and onions and served with thick slices of rye bread. You like liver. Your brother gags at the smell. He once claimed it looked back at him. You glance at the pot simmering for tonight. There's a chunk of something meaty in there. Maybe goat shoulder, maybe squirrel, maybe both. You're not gonna ask. You're just grateful it's not cabbage day again. A little meat goes a long way. It seasons the grains. It lifts the spirits. It reminds you that winter can be softened with a few bites of something rich. Modern people dream of Viking feasts every night. You dream of one perfect cut of lamb, tender, hot, resting in a bowl that isn't cracked. And until then, you'll chew your bone, stir your pot, and wait for the next time the gods, or the goats, decide to be generous. You crouch by the berry bushes at the edge of the forest, fingers stained purple, breath misting in the cool air. It's early morning, the grass still slick with dew, and the birds above you are arguing over something only birds understand. Today is a foraging day, and you're on a mission to find something, anything, that isn't a root. You pluck another blackberry, tart and sun-warmed, and pop it into your mouth. It bursts on your tongue with a sweetness that's almost shocking. After days of stew and smoke, this is a miracle. Foraging is a core part of your survival. And in Viking life, you're not just hunting with spears, you're hunting with your eyes. You scan the woods for signs of wild garlic, sorrel, yarrow, nettle, elderflower, cloudberries, lingonberries, and mushrooms. So many mushrooms. You move through the underbrush with practiced care. Some mushrooms are friendly, some are less so. You learned that the hard way after your cousin decided to test a new variety during a spring thaw and spent the evening giggling at a tree stump he claimed was Freya. To this day, he refuses to eat anything fuzzier than a goat. You spot a cluster of chanterelles, golden and fragrant. Jackpot. You slice them at the stem with your knife and place them gently in your foraging basket, next to a bundle of wood sorrel and a few wild apples, still firm and green. Historians still debate whether foraging was a daily necessity or a seasonal supplement. You think it's both. There's always something to find. Tiny, fleeting bursts of flavor hidden in the underbrush or sprouting defiantly from rocky cliffs. There's even a tradition of children being taught edible plants through rhymes and songs. You remember one about how the mushroom with teeth will steal your breath, which haunted your dreams for years. But, hey, you've never accidentally eaten a death cap. As you head deeper into the woods, you find a patch of sea buckthorn, its orange berries gleaming like fire. You hesitate. They're sour, aggressively so, but full of nutrients, and good for stewing into sour-sweet paste or drying for later use. You pull a handful and ignore the thorns. Not everything you forage is for eating. Some herbs are for healing: chamomile, birch bark, feverfew. Others are for flavoring ale, like bog myrtle or juniper, and still others are just pretty. You bring back a sprig of wild thyme because your aunt likes to hang it above the door for luck. A quirky tale in the village says that elves leave gifts under the right mushroom. If you pick it and thank the earth with your left hand, you've tried it. All you got was dirt under your nails and a slightly offended squirrel. By midday, your basket is full and your stomach is grumbling. You chew a stalk of sorrel on the way home, sour and green, like licking a lemon that grew up in a swamp. You love it. You reach the edge of the longhouse clearing just as someone is stirring the pot. You hand over the herbs and mushrooms, and they're tossed in with a nod of approval. Tonight's stew will have layers, bright, herbal, earthy. It'll taste like the forest. You sit on a log and clean your knife, watching as your little sister skips into the woods with a basket of her own. She knows the difference between crowberry and deadly nightshade, between wild chive and grass that only pretends to be helpful. Modern folks romanticize foraging as a lifestyle. For you, it's just how you stay alive with dignity, and occasionally a sense of delight. There's something thrilling about biting into a wild strawberry, knowing you found it, picked it, and didn't have to trade a goat skin for it. Dinner that night is transformed. The mushrooms are soft and nutty. The herbs give the broth a kick. The apples add a surprising tang. Someone asks what you did differently, and you shrug. I followed the goat trail, and honestly, that's not even the weirdest recipe you've used this week. You slide the wooden bowl across the table, watching carefully as each family member gets their portion. A little more meat for your grandfather, the warmest cut for your mother, the extra root scrapings for your sister, who eats them like they're rare sweets. It's not about luxury. It's about balance. In the Viking world, meals are as much about status and structure as they are about hunger. And tonight, the structure is on full display. The table isn't carved with gold. It's just long planks, balanced, on trestles. The bowls don't match. The spoons are all slightly warped. But the unspoken rules, they're etched into the room as firmly as any runestone. You take your spot, somewhere in the middle, not too high, not too low. The elders sit nearest the hearth, the warmest spot, the one that makes the stew taste better just by proximity. The younger kids gather near the edges, giggling, slurping, occasionally tossing pebbles into cups when they think no one's looking. Your grandmother ladles out a second helping of stew to a neighbor who helped fix the roof last week. He bows slightly in thanks. You realize that food isn't just nutrition, it's currency. A well-fed ally is a loyal one. Historians still debate whether Viking households strictly adhered to hierarchy during meals, or if the seating was more fluid in smaller farms. But in your longhouse, hierarchy hums softly with every clink of spoon and scrape of bowl. Your brother grumbles quietly about getting the end of the porridge pot. He's young enough to protest, old enough to know better. Your mother shoots him a glance sharp enough to split firewood. He lowers his head and eats. You smile. Not because it's funny, but because it's familiar. Who gets what and how much is a daily negotiation. And you've learned that being generous now pays off when the smoked lamb comes out later. There's also the matter of guest portions. Visitors get first servings, always. Even if it means you're chewing on cabbage cores and pretending it's intentional, hospitality is sacred. A full belly can turn a stranger into a friend, or, at the very least, a neutral party who won't raid your chickens. You once watched your uncle give up his own meat to a passing skald who sang about his bravery 3 verses too long. The meat was tender. The song was not. Still, your uncle said it was worth it. Tonight, the portions are fair, if modest. A little goat, some leeks, a slice of barley bread toasted over the fire. You drizzle it with a spoonful of rendered fat, which is more precious than gold on a cold night. Everyone murmurs quiet thanks, not to the gods, necessarily, but to the cook, the goat, and the fact that no one's teeth broke on a rock in the porridge. A quirky belief in your family claims that the size of your stew portion reflects the strength of your ancestors' approval. You're not sure you believe it, but you can't help glancing at your bowl with a bit more reverence. As the meal winds down, the children lick their spoons and pretend they're warriors feasting in Valhalla. The elders sip warm ale and talk about the last storm. You sit quietly, savoring the last mouthful of soft carrot, and feel the weight of belonging. This meal, this ritual, this performance of giving and taking isn't just about food. It's about community, obligation, and unspoken kindness. You help with cleanup, stacking bowls, wiping down the table with a cloth that's seen more feasts than you've had birthdays. Someone jokes about who gets to scrape the pot tonight. Your little sister volunteers. She always does. She says the crispy bits at the bottom taste like victory. You glance around the room, the tired faces, the firelight dancing off rough timber, the quiet fullness of another shared meal. You didn't feast. You didn't starve. You simply ate together. And in Viking life, that's everything. The sun creeps in at a lazy slant, casting gold on the rough walls as you check the granary. You walk past the goats, the ash pile, the rack of drying fish, each a familiar part of the rhythm, and duck into the small shed-like structure at the far end of the yard. You pull the latch, step inside, and breathe in the cool, dry scent of stored grain and hard-earned order. It smells like barley and responsibility. In Viking households, food isn't just cooked, it's managed. And the one who manages it isn't always the head of the household, or the biggest warrior, or the oldest grandmother. Sometimes it's you. More often, it's your mother, your aunt, or your sister, the women who guard the keys. Literally. You pat your belt, where a small ring of iron keys clinks softly. They're tied with braided wool cord and swing gently as you move. They don't open treasure chests or secret crypts. They open the grain bins, the cheese storage, the smokehouse latches, and the lockbox for salt and trade goods. They are the Viking version of a spreadsheet, a pantry app, and a security system rolled into one. Historians agree, Viking women had authority in the household economy. They oversaw food production, preservation, storage, and distribution. They kept the meals moving, the larders full, and the stew pot predictable, and when the men were away raiding or trading, it was the women who ran the show. You check the stock of barley, still good. Enough for another 2 weeks, maybe more if you stretch it with peas. You rotate the sacks so the older ones get used first, brushing off a light layer of dust. One sack has a tiny nibble hole. You frown, squint into the dark, and catch a flash of mouse eyes. You sigh. Another trap to reset later. Still, nothing catastrophic. You scoop a bowl full of barley, another of oats, and mark it mentally, enough for tomorrow's bread and porridge. Then there's the butter barrel, sealed with a waxed cloth and marked with your mother's rune. You lift the cloth gently and inspect. Thick, golden, faintly sour. You'll skim the top and use the fresher stuff for cooking. The older portion, near the bottom, is destined for trade or possibly a very enthusiastic festival pancake. Yes, Viking pancakes were a thing. Flat cakes of oats and milk, fried on a hot stone and occasionally sweetened with dried berries or a rare drizzle of honey. Your uncle called them shield cakes. You call them the reason to wake up on feast days. You move to the cheese shelf, lifting the lids off clay pots where crumbly rounds of goat cheese sit, aging like slightly disgruntled gnomes. You sniff one. Too sharp. Another. Just right. That'll go into tonight's stew, or possibly into your pocket, depending on how the rest of the day unfolds. Then come the herbs, dried and tied in bundles. You run your fingers across them. Thyme, marjoram, mint, a bit of stinging nettle that reminds you not to touch too confidently. You pull a sprig and tuck it behind your ear. Just because you manage the household doesn't mean you can't have flair. A quirky saying among the elders is, "The woman with the keys rules the winter." You've always liked that. It means the one who knows what's in the pantry decides who eats what in February when the snow's up to the rafters and the goats are considering mutiny. You seal the storeroom and head back to the longhouse, grain in hand, plans already forming for dinner. The stew will get oats for thickening. The flatbread will use up the older barley. Maybe a twist of soft cheese, folded in, if no one's looking. As you pass the threshold, you feel the keys bounce against your hip. You try not to smile too obviously, but it's there, that quiet satisfaction of knowing you are the heartbeat of the household. Modern folks might think the Vikings were all about swords and sails, but the truth? Power often hung from a simple iron ring, not on the battlefield, but in the pantry. You stoke the fire, you grind the grain, you stir the pot, and you don't need a crown to rule the kitchen. You're sitting by the fire with a bowl of barley stew when someone bursts through the door shouting, "They've come, they brought nuts." You nearly drop your spoon. Visitors mean many things. News, gossip, trouble, the occasional surprise marriage proposal. But today, they mean something far more exciting. Trade goods. You set your bowl down and rush outside, heart fluttering not for the merchants themselves, but for what they've brought with them. A sack of dried figs, a pouch of almonds, and, could it be, a chunk of crystallized honey? These are not things you grow. These are not things you find in the forest, or trap in a net, or coax from an angry goat. These are things that come from elsewhere, across oceans, over mountains, through bartering and diplomacy and the occasional axe-waving misunderstanding. You watch as the visiting traders unpack their goods, dried dates, cracked walnuts, bits of linen soaked in wine, and strange spices you can't identify by smell alone. One of them offers a taste of something soft and orange. It turns out to be a dried apricot, and you swear for a second the gods must have invented it just for winter mornings. Historians agree. Vikings were traders as much as raiders. The same longships that carried warriors to battle also carried furs, honey, amber, soapstone, and, yes, barrels of dried fish to distant shores. In return, exotic goods, strange grains, fruits from the south, spices, glass beads, tools, silk. If you were lucky, you trade 2 wheels of cheese and a small sack of smoked eel for a handful of hazelnuts and a skin of sour wine. It's a fair deal. You'll use the nuts for porridge toppings and the wine. Well, you'll find a reason. That night, you help prepare a special meal to celebrate the traders, to thank the gods for safe travel, or just because you're all a little tired of rutabaga. The stew is thickened with barley and of course, but now it's flavored with bits of dried plum. You slice the almonds and stir them in. You crumble goat cheese on top. And for dessert, a precious bowl of honeyed oats with a single, glorious fig. You eat slowly, savoring every bite like it might vanish. Your cousin tries to steal your last almond. You stab him with your spoon. Gently. Modern people forget how magical food can be when it's rare. You've had porridge 100 ways, but porridge with figs? That's poetry. You remember one winter when a merchant brought saffron, just a pinch, in a sealed wax packet. Your mother added it to a stew, and the whole room smelled like candlelight and warmth. You haven't seen saffron since. You still dream about that color. A fringe theory you once overheard claims that Vikings believed almonds increased wisdom or virility, depending on who was telling the story. You decide not to test either theory today, as the fire crackles and bowls are scraped clean. You think about the long roads these ingredients traveled. Some came from the east, overland through Slavic kingdoms. Others arrived by ship from Frankish ports. Every bite is a story. Every spice is a whisper of somewhere else. You save one fig and wrap it in cloth, not for yourself, for your little sister. She's never tasted one before, and you want her first to be a moment she remembers. Because in a life ruled by weather, goats, and repetition, a small surprise can be a treasure. You help with cleanup, humming a tune the traders taught you. You don't understand the words. You don't need to. The melody carries the memory of honey and sun-dried fruit, of open horizons and the scent of distant soil. Tomorrow you'll eat stew again. But tonight, you ate like someone else's sky touched your table, and that's enough. You're sitting by the fire, belly full from yesterday's fig-tinged feast, when your cousin flops down beside you, picks at the end of a stale loaf, and mutters, "I think we're basically doing keto." You blink. "What?" He grins. "No bread, no sugar, mostly fat and fish." He waves the crust like a scholar presenting evidence. "Viking keto." You roll your eyes, but then pause. It's not the worst comparison. Your diet, though forged by necessity, not podcast trends, is oddly aligned with what some modern folks spend thousands of silver coins trying to replicate. You eat whole grains, root vegetables, fermented dairy, fatty meats, smoked fish, and drink ale that might double as vinegar. There's no refined sugar, no processed flour, no imported wine coolers. Modern people call this clean eating. You call it Tuesday. You mentally walk through your day. Breakfast, barley flatbread with sour butter. Lunch, smoked trout, goat cheese, maybe a turnip if you're feeling wild. Trondatsu. Dinner, stew, always stew. With whatever didn't walk away or rot first, you drink ale, fermented milk, or thin broth. Your only sweetener is honey, and even that's rare, more precious than salt, sometimes used to pay debts or seal courtship promises. You've heard of people hiding honeycombs in floorboards like treasure. You would too, if bees didn't hate you personally. Historians still debate whether Viking diets were high-fat by design or by geography. You live in a cold, wet world. You need calories, especially ones that stick. So when you eat meat, you eat the fat. You render it. You drink it in broth. You slather it on bread. You save every drop like it's sacred. Your cousin once licked fat off his fingers and said it tasted like warmth made edible. You laughed, but he wasn't wrong. And carbs? Yes. You eat grains, but not mountains of them. You don't have refined wheat or sugar to binge on. Your carbs are barley, rye, oats, grains that are coarse, fibrous, and often soaked or soured to make them digestible. You bake flatbreads, not fluffy loaves. You chew your bread like it owes you something. A quirky theory you heard from a Frankish merchant claimed that Vikings lived longer because of their diet: less sugar, more fish oil, fewer processed foods. You're not sure if that's true. Plenty of people die young here, but the ones who don't, they're strong. Even at 70, your grandmother can still haul a water bucket in each hand and insult 3 neighbors before breakfast. Then there's fasting, not by choice, necessarily, but by season. Winter leans out your meals. Spring is stingy. There are days you eat nothing but broth and hard cheese, or dried fish scraped with onion, or stale barley porridge fried in leftover lard. Is it intentional? No. Is it trendy? Apparently. You think of those modern folk paying fortunes for bone broth. You make it because otherwise the bones go to waste. They sip it like medicine. You drink it like weather armor. You chuckle to yourself. The Viking diet, for all its simplicity, is weirdly fashionable now. Low sugar, whole foods, farm to table, but without the restaurant. Keto, paleo, intermittent fasting. You're living every wellness trend without meaning to, but you're not chasing health. You're chasing survival. You rise, stretch your arms, and grab a slab of cold lamb fat, spread on hard bread. It's chewy, greasy, possibly cursed, but it gives you the strength to haul firewood, mend nets, chase goats, and endure the relentless campaign of root vegetable season. Your cousin takes a bite, chews thoughtfully, and says, "Do you think someone in the future will eat this on purpose?" You look at the bread, the fat, the smear of onion paste, and you grin, only if they're really rich or really bored. You finish your snack and toss the crust to the dog, who eats it like a reward. You head outside, cloak tight, wind in your teeth, and smile, because whether they call it Viking keto or accidental clean eating, one thing is certain: you didn't choose the diet chose you. Night falls quietly. The wind howls through the thatched roof like a tired song, and the fire settles into a soft glow that throws shadows onto the walls like old friends returning. You sit beside the hearth, your bowl empty, your belly warm, and your mind drifting, not toward tomorrow's chores, but somewhere stranger, softer. You're thinking about Valhalla, not the battles or the mead horns or the endless feasting that the stories love to shout about, but the food. What it tastes like, how it feels to eat without counting spoonfuls or stretching barley to last the week, how it might be to dine where the pot is always full and the goat never escapes. In your world, food is effort. You chop, boil, dry, ferment, barter, milk, gut, skin, and stir. You plan your meals like campaigns. You memorize every grain in the granary. You bless the stew when it thickens properly. And when you burn the bread, you blame the wind and pretend it was always meant to be that crispy. But in Valhalla, you imagine the food just is a feast that never spoils, a roast that never shrinks, mead that fills but never fogs. You picture yourself there, sitting at an absurdly long table, feet warm on a fur rug, a wedge of sky or the size of a helmet on your plate, and a roast ox leg carved just for you. They say you must die in battle to reach it, that it's only for warriors and heroes, but quietly, between the clink of wooden bowls and the murmur of sleeping kin. You wonder, what if surviving 1,000 nights of turnip stew also counts as valor? Historians still debate whether Valhalla was literal, metaphorical, or motivational. You don't care. What matters is what it meant. A place where food meant celebration, not calculation. Where you could eat because you wanted to, not because you had just enough. A quirky bit of village wisdom says that dreams of feasting mean your ancestors are watching you. Why? You hope tonight they see you, tired, full, still standing, and nod in approval. You pull your blanket tighter and lie back on the straw. The longhouse creaks, the embers whisper, someone snores rhythmically, and the dog shifts beside you, pressing against your feet like a half-warm pillow. You breathe in the lingering smell of stew and smoke and salted fish. It clings to everything, your clothes, your hair, your life, but you wouldn't trade it, because in this quiet moment, you realize something. You've been to Valhalla already, not the hall of the slain, but the table of the living, where a shared bowl, a hot fire, and one soft piece of bread can feel like forever. And that's enough, you let's Arasalao. Let your eyes close. The warmth of the fire fades slowly, like twilight dissolving into dreams. Your limbs are heavy now, pleasantly tired from a long day of gathering, grinding, cooking, chewing, laughing, thinking. You can still feel the flicker of heat on your skin, the echo of roasted meat in your mouth, and the faint clink of wooden spoons against clay. The longhouse breathes around you, timbers settling, goats sighing, the wind pawing gently at the roof as if asking to come in. Someone shifts in their sleep. A bowl rolls softly against the wall. The dog exhales. Everything smells like smoke and sour bread and something faintly herbal, maybe from the thyme sprig still tucked behind your ear. You think about figs, about salted fish, about the goat you chased for an hour and still didn't catch. Tomorrow will bring more of the same. The fire, the stew, the grain, the weather. But for now, in this quiet, your belly full and your thoughts light, you don't need more. You've eaten the day. You've stored the season. You've honored the earth, the sea, the fire, the pot. You drift, not toward dreams of castles or battles or golden forks, but toward a soft field of barley swaying in windless calm. The scent of baking bread lingers on the air. Somewhere nearby, a kettle hums, a bowl waits, a feast, small and quiet, and just for you. The fire fades, the house sleeps, and so do you. End of script. Sweet dreams.